Hi everyone, this is Sonia Lal. Welcome to the interview series, Your Child's Best Future. How to get your child into a top college and set for a happy, successful life. We're doing this interview series to learn from experts who can bring clarity to the college process for high school students and their parents. Today we're excited to have Maria Furtado joining us. Maria is the executive director of the nonprofit organization Colleges That Change Lives. She has worked in higher education for over 20 years, including 2 CTCL schools, Clark University and Eckerd College. Maria speaks all around the country to students, parents, and guidance counselors about college rankings and popular misconceptions about college admissions, the strength and worth of a liberal arts education, and offers tips for students and parents on how to manage the college search. She really enjoys helping students and families as they take on the college search process and believes that finding the right college should be about fit, not just settling or chasing the name brand. Maria also believes that it's okay and actually preferable to enjoy talking about colleges and that the search should actually be fun. Thank you so much for joining us, Maria.
Thank you for asking.
Tell us a little bit about how you got involved in this field.
I was a little bit unusual in the world of higher education. I was never a tour guide for my college. I was never an overnight host or anything like that. But I was laid off from a previous job, and I had taken 2 classes toward my master's at Clark University. And I went to a birthday party for a friend, and I heard someone at the party say that she worked at Clark University. So I cranked up all my courage, and I went over and I said, hello, and I hear that you work at Clark, and I really like the classes I've taken. Any chance you're hiring? And it just happened that she was hiring. So she hired me in a, what we would call operations position, so the back of the house. It was a 10-month position. And I did that for about a year and a half, and then I was lucky enough to get a counseling job, the admission counselor job, and I ultimately was the director of admission at Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts for 7 years. At that point, I decided that maybe it'd be fun to live where it didn't snow and to look at another institution where I thought I might be able to be helpful and useful and make some difference and change. And I ended up moving to Eckerd College in St. Petersburg, Florida. While I was at Clark was during the time period when the first book, Colleges That Change Lives, was published, and a friend and colleague from Beloit College in Wisconsin said, this might be an interesting group to work together. So we started working together as an experiment and a little bit of curious to see if we could kind of interest students and parents and counselors in looking at this process differently, as well as having them look at some schools that they might not have thought of before. So we started doing some sort of casual work together. We started traveling together around the U.S., and it really took off, and the message took off and was very, very, very well received by families. And I just really enjoyed the work, the collaboration, the idea that we could surprise families by being so collaborative was kind of a fun thing too. So I became one of the people who was one of the leaders of the unofficial group that we had. And about 10 years into our work, we decided that recognizing Lauren Pope's age, he was in his mid-90s at the time, he would probably not work on another book. He had worked on 3 copies of the book. But we really wanted his message to continue, the message of really thinking about college differently, thinking about what happens while you're there, not so much the question of what are the numbers of the people coming in, but really what is the result for the students coming out at the other end. And as we did that, we decided the nonprofit made the most sense, and I became chair of the board of the nonprofit. Ultimately, it worked out that my friend and colleague was ready to move on from being the executive director of CTCL, and the board was kind enough to approve me as the new executive director, and that was just about 3 years ago.
Wonderful, wonderful. So yeah, it sounds like you've had several years in higher education. Tell us a little bit about your feelings about college rankings.
They are not my favorite. I think they're too simple. They're too simplistic. They are a perfectly fine tool in an entire toolbox, but not the one tool that families should use. It's in essence, it's too easy. And it's not necessarily reflective of a particular student's values or a particular family's values. Here's a way to look at it in my mind. If a ranking system had 10 criteria, and all 10 criteria were the exact same criteria that were important to a student and to a family, and they were important in the same rank order, 1 through 10, then that ranking system would be perfect for the student. If, however, only 5 of the criteria are the same for the student, then it's an imperfect tool. It's a tool, but it's an imperfect tool. Americans are busy. We want things that are quick and easy, and we like things that are ranked. We like things that have been pre-evaluated because we have a lot of things to do. And so the idea that something's been ranked is comforting. I think that it's too simple or too easy when it comes to something like college admission and college experience because you're not talking about a toaster. A toaster makes toast. But a college educates and influences and becomes part of a student's history, a part of their life experience. And that's very different than toast. So I think that having rankings as the one and only tool that a family uses is just not complex enough. This is a complex discussion for a family. It needs to be bigger than, oh, look, it's ranked this way. Because that ranking is particular in its value. And again, if the values are not the exact same values for a family, I think that makes that tool too simple.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. How do you recommend that students and parents go about doing kind of broader kind of research and engage in deeper dialogue about, colleges?
I think the deeper dialogue is the interesting piece because one of the first things that happens when a student becomes a junior, sometimes a sophomore, depending on the community, but typically a junior, and it almost happens overnight. One day you're just going along and you're a sophomore, and the next day school's done and now you're technically a junior, and all of a sudden you're supposed to know. So what would you do as a 16-year-old that's the most tangible, and what would you do as a parent that's the most tangible? You would say, oh, well, I need to know a major, and I need to know a career path, and I need to have a list of schools. And we want it to happen so quickly. But what's so much more important than that in many ways are the other kinds of questions. Not so much what do you want to major in, but what do you enjoy? What do you enjoy learning? And that's different. That's a different way to approach it. If you enjoy the humanities and the discussion-based conversation about and learning through that process, then that's one thing. But if you're more mathematical and more scientifically inclined and you really, really want to learn by that hands-on, real, let me experiment it in the most traditional way, let me experiment on it, then that's a whole different way of approaching the search and approaching the conversation. That idea of, do you want to be challenged? And I don't just mean intellectually, because all of us, we hope, going off to college want to be intellectually challenged. But it's easy for most students to find a community in which everybody thinks like them. So no one would question what they believe politically, socially, religiously, economically. They wouldn't question it because they would all really believe the same things. And that could be on the liberal end or the conservative end. But going to a place that has a real mix of people gives you a chance to learn how to defend and how to mutate those things that you believe. Going to a place where you're outside the norm makes it really interesting in a lot of ways. I didn't fit in extremely well in my own personal college, to be honest. It was a lot more mainstream than I was. But it was good for me. It made me think more broadly. It made me recognize that I had to understand why I believed the things that I did that were different from what others might believe at my school. And that was important. I think that's something we don't always think about. What do you want from that community feeling, that combination of support and challenge academically, intellectually, but also personally? What do you want from that mix? I think it's also important to think about where, the geography. If you're a person who grew up in South Florida and you've never lived where it snows, there's never been the traditional, what we think of as traditional seasons, Wouldn't that be an interesting way to live for 4 years? And on the other end, if you've always lived in liberal New England or a liberal piece of New England, perhaps going to school in the Midwest, going to school in the South or Southeast, that might also be pretty interesting because not just your campus might be different, but also the community around it. So I think that those kinds of questions are really precursors to what a major should be, because that part, it's easy to panic. I mean, I know that I always said I wanted to be a lawyer, partially because I was a first-generation student. That was a very tangible thing. I want to be a lawyer. It's not like saying I want to be a history major. That's much more amorphous, especially if most of the people you interact with have not gone to college. So saying I want to be a history major doesn't give them something to hook on to, but saying I want to be a lawyer does. But there are so many paths and so many majors that students will find interesting that they don't even necessarily know exist yet. But getting that deep that quickly or that specific that quickly, I think is a big challenge for students and families.
Yeah, I agree. It definitely takes a lot more thought and research and time, getting to know the college. What are your suggestions, in terms of, let's say a family and a student talk about these things and they decide, yes, they do want to be challenged. They want to be part of a community where there's a lot of diversity and maybe even a geographical location that's different from where they grew up. Do you have any recommendations in terms of what more they can do besides going to a college's website? I know that you guys have 44 schools that are highlighted in Colleges That Change Lives. And
correct.
Is there anything there that we could look at, that students could look at?
Well, there's certainly more to do than go to a website. And if you go to the website, you want to do more than just look at the admission pages. If you're interested in diversity, then define it first off, because Americans tend to define diversity very quickly and very narrowly as race, whereas I personally try to define it much broadly, and I would push back, and I do push back on students and families when they say I'm interested in diversity. So my question to them is, what kind? What does that mean to you? Because if it's just racial diversity, then you're looking for data. And you're also looking for academics, I think. So if in particular you're interested in, is there a large African-American population? Well, that's an important question, yes. But also, is there an academic piece that relates to African-American history or African-American literature that you might also find interesting? And I think that can extrapolate out to other ethnic groups, whether it's Latinos, whether it's Southeast Asian, whether it's Asian in the biggest definition of Asian. There's a lot of ways to look at that and define that. If diversity is bigger for a person, so for example, it's not just race, it's race, but it's also geographic background. Is it domestic and international students? Is it socio-political differences? Then that means you have to poke around on the website a little more. And I would say look at, for example, if you can find a list of organizations. Is there a pride organization or something that's related to LGBT issues if that's important to the student and the family? Is there are there religious organizations if that's important? Are there political organizations if that's important? And then look at the community surrounding. And by that, try to figure out from the website and other resources, does the community on the campus connect to and interact with the community around it? How do students use their space, not just on campus, but around them? And I think that also is useful for those kids, for example, who don't want to be in a city because the way that they relax is they go out. They hike, they walk, they chase Pokemon out into the woods, whatever it might be that gets them outside. That's important. That's easier to do at a place like Emory and Henry, which is in rural Virginia, than it is to do at a place like Reed College, which is in Portland, Oregon. So there are that spatial piece, I think, comes into that biggest way of defining diversity. Beyond the websites, the students can clearly come to one of our programs. We'd love to have them. We have 3 tours coming up in the next month in 3 different parts of the country. But they can also meet with a rep when the rep visits their high school. meet with a rep at a local college fair that's not specific to CTCL. They can call the office and talk to somebody the old-fashioned way. They can email a rep. They can see if they have students online that they can interact with. And then there are, some of the less official things. Go to their Facebook page. Follow their Facebook page. Follow their Twitter feed. See what they talk about. See what they're proud of. Do those things match the student's criteria and the student's interests? That's when you get beyond the website. The number one most important thing, and I know you advise this for your clients as well, is go visit. Because everything looks pretty on paper and everything looks pretty online. But go visit. Go see the place and see the people, meet the people, and interact. That's the key. That's the biggest piece.
Okay. Yeah, you've covered so much. That's very interesting what you said about looking for the list of student organizations and researching the surrounding communities, the academic departments. That's very, very helpful, in addition to all of these other ways that we can learn about a college. Tell us a little bit about the colleges that are highlighted in CTCL.
So CTCL, as you probably know, was originally a book, Colleges That Changed Lives. And 3 versions were written by Loren Pope. And Loren had an interesting history. He started as a newspaper writer in the Mid-Atlantic. He was involved in the Civil Rights Movement. And then he ultimately did some work in higher ed, and he landed eventually at the New York Times. And he wrote about education as the education editor for the New York Times for years and years and years. And as he wrote about different kinds of schools and different types of education, he really, really became to appreciate the strength of a liberal arts education. And just as an aside, that always includes the sciences, just for clarity. But then he really also started to appreciate the strength of a small campus community and the connections that can happen there that are sometimes unexpected, the faculty connections and the way that the students have more opportunities than they sometimes think they will on a small campus. As he continued his work, families came to him and they asked for advice. And so he ultimately started advising families. And as he did that, he recommended a lot of small liberal arts colleges. So good Americans came to him and said, "We'd love to have a list. Can't you make us a list of good schools?" And he said, "No, but I'll write a book." And he wrote his first book at the tender age of 80, and it was called Looking Beyond the Ivy League. And it was done in narrative form. And he touched on probably close to 200 colleges in that book. And families came back and said, "Loren, this book has been so helpful. Thank you so much. Couldn't you make us a list now?" Sort of you got that book thing out of your way or, out of your craw. But can't you make us a list? And he said, "No, but I'll write another book." And he wrote Colleges That Changed Lives. In that book, he profiled the schools, and he wrote about 40 different institutions across the country in more depth. Then he revised the book 2 times. And as I said earlier, when he was getting to be in his mid-90s and was working on the last book that he worked on, we wanted to come together as an organization to be his voice, to continue his message about the liberal arts, to continue his message that looking at a school in a broader way and recognizing that because they have big incoming numbers doesn't always mean that they have transformational experiences for their students. Some schools whose averages are in the mid-3s, like a 3.3, whose average SAT on the old scale is 1100 or the ACT is in the 25-26 range, those schools are more inclusive in their admission, so they take more students, but they also offer students so much while they're there that the students who leave are much stronger students, and they're much more confident people. And that transformation was extremely important to him, and it still remains important to us as an organization and to the individual schools. So we started our nonprofit with 40 schools, who were profiled in the 2006 book. Those are our founding members. In 2012, Loren's family, because they own everything that has to do with the book, Loren's family and the publisher, Penguin, hired a writer to revise the book in 2012. And when she did that, her name is Hillary Maisel Oswald, when she revised the book, she took 4 schools out and she put 4 schools in. So the 4 schools that came out are still part of our organization. We still believe that they live the mission, that their admission process is thoughtful and careful and holistic, and that the new schools were just an additional group of 4 that have really blended well into our group. So that's why we have 44. The schools range in size right now from probably about 150 at Antioch College in Ohio, which is, as you probably know, reforming itself and going through a big renaissance after closing and reopening. The largest school is probably Evergreen State College in Washington State, or perhaps Hope College in Michigan, and they're more in the 3,500 student range. So students looking for larger schools, this is not the right group. That piece will cross it off right off the bat. But students looking for interesting opportunities, interesting academic systems, these are a great group of schools to look at.
So these are basically small liberal arts schools. They have small campus communities, and they provide an education where the student goes through a process of transformation much more than in any other average college. Is that right?
Oh, I don't know if much more is fair, because this is just 44 examples of schools that really do well with undergraduates, with the 18 to 22-year-olds. There are lots of other schools out there that do an extraordinary job with kids. But this isn't always going to be a very personal experience because it's small. So their intro classes are small. Their upper level classes are maybe 5 or 6 students and a faculty person. So you're really talking about a place where they can be very well known. They would really have to make an effort to be lost in the shuffle. Whereas at larger State University X with 35,000 students, to be found, I think you have to make a lot more of an effort then. And I think that on the small campuses, it's very good for so many kids who aren't necessarily the super confident, or at the other end, the one that's perfectly happy to hide in a class of 500. That's not going to ever happen on these campuses.
Right, right. And in addition to the size, is there anything particular about these colleges? They offer special programs? Or,
What's interesting, I think, is that although they are all liberal arts colleges, all of them have a different way of doing the liberal arts program. And some of it is structural. So, for example, some are on trimester, like Lawrence University. Some are on semester in the traditional way. Antioch College is a co-op school, so there's always an off-campus piece of each year for the student. They do some type of a co-op program. And then Cornell College in Iowa is one of the few schools in this country, or on this hemisphere, I guess, is a better way to look at it, one of the 3 schools that I know of that do one class at a time. So for a student who's really interested in being able to focus for 3.5 weeks on one area and then go ahead and have a couple of days off and then do the next class, it's a very interesting option.
Okay. So there are certain things.
I'm sorry about the dogs barking in the background. As I said to you earlier, it's one of the joys of working at home and one of the challenges of working at home.
No problem. No problem. Yeah, so it sounds like these schools, they give a lot of personal attention, and they place an emphasis on making sure that the students' learning experience is top quality.
Absolutely. If you follow our Facebook feed, a lot of what I post, especially each year, this year and last year, there have been a lot of Fulbrights out of these schools. There are a lot of Gilman scholars, a lot of Watson scholars, a lot of students receiving the critical language scholarships from the government to go abroad and study language and culture. These are students that are incredibly well prepared for their next steps. And what we see is that the schools have used the 4 years that they have these students to really help the kid who was maybe a B-plus kid in high school, maybe a B-plus kid, and is now coming out and doing a Fulbright. And that experience typically comes because they have unexpected support from faculty and unexpected opportunities.
Right, right. So it's a lot of faculty involvement in these schools.
It is. Now, none of these schools are going to drag students kicking and screaming through their experience. They expect students to be responsible adults. They expect students to be excited about the process. They expect them to be invested in their education.
Great. What about your advice on how to make the college search process less stressful? Do you have any tips to share with us?
One of the things that I always suggest to families is that they think about they think about how they can help the college search not be all-encompassing. So, for example, I tell students and families that they should make their car a college-free zone. When they're in the car, they should not talk about college. Because I think that what happens is parents get in the car and they say, oh, here we are, we're trapped in the car. We should talk about college. And then the student gets in the car and thinks, oh my goodness, we're trapped in the car. We're going to want to talk about college. And I think that it just creates stretch points for families. I think that it's also very important that they think about perhaps other ways that they can decompress the process. Maybe they say that whenever we have dinner together as a family, we don't talk about college. So their dinner table becomes a college-free zone. It's too easy for this search to become the only conversation that students have with parents. Students are nervous and scared. Parents are nervous and scared. Everybody's in a place where they feel uncomfortable. For families who've not done this before, who, first-generation kids, I think that there's a different kind of anxiety that comes with that. For families who have done it before, there's different anxieties that come with the pressures of that. I think that the more that you can tame that beast, the better off you are as a family.
Okay, that makes complete sense. So just creating limits on when you have these conversations and make sure it's not the only thing that you talk about during that
Right,
time.
there's a lot more going on in a kid's life and in a parent's life. There really is. And if there are younger siblings, then you add that on and they feel like they get lost in the shuffle because there's little conversation about them sometimes. And that adds more tenseness to the family.
Right. Yeah, that makes complete sense. Do you have any advice for students about how they can take this college search process into their own hands? Is it something that you recommend that students do, or do you feel like parental involvement is part of the process? It should be a joint process of deciding?
I think the parents need to be part of the process, yes. I think the students should be at the front of the family parade, however. The worst experience I can tell you that I had in some ways at any college fair in 20-plus years was I had a mother push her own child out of the way so that she could talk to me about the college search for that child. She literally pushed her own child out of the way. And I think that, even though it's a big metaphor, is sort of what can happen. The parents get excited about this sometimes before their kids do, and the parents get nervous about the financial part, which makes perfect sense that they should. But the student is going to be the one that lives the experience. And if the parent and student can have an honest conversation about the financial piece so that they feel that they're all on the same page about what they can and cannot do financially, I think that's extremely important, without them shutting off the spigot right away and saying, well, you can only go to, because you don't know where you can go till you see the financial aid package. I think that's important to keep in mind. But I think that it has to be a team effort. There are certain things that the students should do, absolutely. They should be the person who talks at a college fair, or at least talks first. They should be the person who introduces themselves when they go to a campus visit. They should walk up to the desk and check in, not their mom. But the parents have to be involved in probably making flights to go visit colleges and getting rental cars, because kids can't do that. So it's sort of a team effort. And the more that the student leads the team, I think the more comfortable the parents are oftentimes that their student is ready to do this. When the parent feels like they have to drag the kid to the college fair and then drag them up to the table and then make them fill out the card, they don't feel as confident about their student's readiness. And I think that can add to the tension within the family.
Yeah, that makes complete sense, definitely. So it sounds like you are recommending that students take initiative in this process, but also have honest conversations with their parents and try to work together as much as possible, but also don't forget that there are other things in life and set limits so it doesn't. Yeah.
I think it's important. I think that so many families get to the end of the process and they feel like they haven't talked about anything except college for 18 months. And think about how exhausting that could be. I mean, we do this for a living, but I'm assuming you talk about something that's not college once in a while. I do.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's been wonderful having you join us today, Maria. We really appreciate all your advice and all your years of experience in this process. It's been great to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciated the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we hope you'll join us again sometime in the future.
Thank you.